In July of 2021, I will celebrate the 30th anniversary of my ordination. I know, clearly I was ordained as a child. Over the past 30 years, I have seen and experienced the best and the worst of people, the highest highs and the lowest lows that families go through. And I have been by the deathbed of too many people to count. Being a pastor is really weird in that way. It's also one of the most sacred trusts you offer to someone. Like most pastors, I was pretty naive when I began and had to grow up spiritually really fast. When you talk about preaching hope in seminary and you read some books about it, it's one thing. When you get to what is known as the Hope Sunday in Advent, and you know that sitting in the congregation is a parent whose only daughter was murdered, or a couple whose twins were born premature and both died, or even when you know the successful business person was just able to retire at the age of 52, hope is no longer abstract, but concrete. And all of a sudden, as a pastor, you feel responsible for not peddling it unnecessarily or falsely. As you know, I am wary of many preachers of hope. Like anything, it can be meaningless preaching if the person who is preaching has not experienced tragedy or knows nothing of struggle. How can you preach about hope if you are someone who has never run out of hope? If you don't know what it's like to have no hope, how can you possibly know how to talk about what it's like to have hope? What I find interesting when people talk about their own relationship with hope is that many of us will talk about where we lost hope or how we've struggled with hope or stopped believing that hope was a thing. But what we often do next is compare our suffering to someone else's suffering that is far worse. In doing so, we minimize our suffering, and then we also minimize the experienced lack of hope. When I was young and the only person in my family who went to church, I was taught that if you believe hard enough, anything was possible. After I'd been attending that church and the attached Christian school for a few years, people figured out that my mom was an alcoholic. The pastor and the principal and some of the teachers would tell me that if I would pray and believe, God could cure my mom. I lived believing in that cure and hoping for it for almost 10 years. And then my mom almost died of cirrhosis of the liver when I was 18. And at that point, I lost all hope for her. I realized that she was very ill and that she did not even hope she could get better. It's not enough to say to anyone, just believe it will happen and it will. Or the Christian version, which is, just believe God can do it and surely God will do it. God just doesn't work in the world in that way, usually. God works through humans, and sometimes the humans God is trying to work through or trying to heal give nothing in return and give no openings. What do we say about hope when that happens? This first Sunday of Advent is the Sunday of hope. Both of the texts that were read this morning come out of times when people were completely out of hope. it seemed like nothing would ever change. Isaiah was writing to a people in exile, people who couldn't go where they wanted to go when they wanted to go. People who were literally in the wilderness, a land that was strange and foreboding and scary to them. The text that was read in Isaiah is from the book that is called 2nd Isaiah, and it has a much more comforting tone than the first part of Isaiah, which is mostly about shaming the people into repentance. Apparently that didn't work, so this is the attempt to offer comfort. In the pandemic we've been living through, we have seen these two voices. We've seen shames. Well, I should say we've heard the one that shames, and we've heard the one that offers comfort. Isaiah's comfort comes giving the people something to hope for. Clear the way for God, because God is coming, and when God comes, like a shepherd, God will care for the sheep, lifting the lambs onto God's own lap and guiding the nursing ewes. Preparation and getting ready is part of what fuels people's hope here. There is something to do as you wait for God to come. Mark's gospel is the first one to be written and also the shortest. Mark is unique in that he doesn't cover the birth narratives, but he gets right to Jesus' public ministry. No time for stories about birth. John the Baptist is the fiery prophet in the origin story of Christianity. John's aim is to change lives and to make way for the baptizing of the Spirit. The call of John to the people is that they should make themselves ready because God is about to surprise them. Part of what is surprising is that as soon as Jesus appears in Mark, he's sent out into the wilderness with no food among the wild beasts. And then, the story says, angels took care of him. Can we see those who attend to us in so many ways as the angels of God's presence, never leaving us alone in the dangers of the world? And can we hear that also as a call to be angels as well? Despite having given up hope that my mom would be healed of alcoholism, there was something else that happened for me over time related to hope. I, along with most of my siblings, developed deep resilience. I also learned to trust that angels of sorts always showed up in my life when I needed them the most. So I had tremendous hope for my own future because I learned to trust that God always sent me angels. And I learned to trust in myself with God's help to be able to handle any situation that might come my way. My life has not been easy, and yet I'm grateful for the struggle because of how my own struggle has fashioned me as a person. I wouldn't be your pastor today if it hadn't been for the rough times I endured as a child and for the angels God provided all along the way. If you're beginning to feel robbed because you can't identify your own angels, you might be looking for the supernatural when what I'm talking about are all the regular people who simply walked with me for a time. Part of how I think about and experience hope is through other humans. Hope comes in tangible and bodily forms. Some of you know that John O'Donnell has been volunteering his time and his legal expertise to help people expunge their records so they can live without automatic discrimination that comes from those formerly incarcerated. John is tangible bodily hope for those who are in need of hope. John has also helped someone in our own congregation to open a bank account for the first time in more than 60 years. I want you to let that sink in for a moment. Someone was not able to have a bank account, and John, by volunteering some help, was able to make that happen. More often than not, hope is not a cosmic, otherworldly thing as much as it is another person being tangibly there for us. And sometimes it's us for someone else. Sometimes we end up being the angels, believe it or not. During this Advent season, we're using some resources from the Worship Design Studio, curated by Dr. Marcia McPhee. One of the offerings for this Advent series is a film series that has a variety of films related to how music has given people hope. For this Sunday of Hope, the film that was recommended is called Defiant Requiem. Dr. McPhee writes this: "It was chosen because the theme song for our worship series, I Believe, is based on an anonymous poem believed to be written by a Jewish person hiding from the Nazis in the 1940s. This week's documentary is also about that time period. Defiant Requiem highlights the most dramatic example of intellectual and artistic courage in the Terezin concentration camp during World War II. It's the remarkable story of Raphael Schachter, a brilliant young Czech conductor who was arrested and sent to Terezin in 1941. He demonstrated moral leadership under the most brutal circumstances, determined to sustain courage and hope for his fellow prisoners by enriching their souls through great music. His most extraordinary act was to recruit 150 prisoners and teach them Verdi's Requiem by rote in a dank cellar using a single score over multiple rehearsals and after grueling days of forced labor. The Requiem was performed on 16 occasions for fellow prisoners. The last, most infamous performance occurred on June 23, 1944, before high-ranking SS officers from Berlin and the International Red Cross to support the charade that the prisoners were treated well and flourishing. I'm going to pause for a minute and we're going to show you a trailer for this film in hopes that you will watch it.
I went downstairs and there was a man sitting and she just said, I want to know, do all of you like to sing?
If people are robbed of freedom, they want to be creative, and they were.
Verdi's music is powerful. It represents a threat. And it was a tremendous challenge to have the Germans right there in front of us and tell them to their face.
It was something which made us strong. It has given us a resistance against our fate.
Doing a performance was not entertainment. It was a fight for life.
This Verdi's Requiem put all of us into another world. This was not the world with the Nazis. This was our world.
These were hours of pure joy, as much as you can call joy in camp.
Here they were, surrounded by man's worst, and these Jewish prisoners were determined to remind everyone of man's best. And I brought the Verdi here because I want to assure these people that we've heard them.
This Advent, we have some time to prepare ourselves for the birth of Jesus again. Part of how we can prepare is by asking ourselves honestly where we have run out of hope, or where we need to let go of hope once and for all. Where is hope gone for you? How do you feel about that? Some of us haven't run out of hope completely, but are hanging on by a thread. What hope or hopes are you hanging on to by a thread? Do you have enough energy to keep holding that thread? Some of us have hope that is solid and strong. What are the hopes that are solid and strong for you? If you find yourself saying, I should feel more hope than I do, or I should be more hopeful than I am, how about giving yourself a break from shoulds and just letting yourself feel what you feel, and then imagining that God, the shepherd, is caring for you in that? The thing to remember is what I firmly believe, and that is there is no magic in hope. What I mean by that is there is no genie waiting to hear about your 3 wishes and then deciding whether or not to grant them. There is no wizard or witch in the sky ready to wave their wand. There is no punishing and rewarding God waiting for you to be good. Sorry, parents, if I ruined your Christmas threats. In my life, and in Jesus' time in the wilderness, the heart of hope has been the angels that have come at just the right time to grab my hand and walk with me through something terrible. You would think that having seen the terrible things I've seen in the last 30 years as a pastor would make me cynical. Instead, I have more hope than ever because of the angels walking this earth who I see show up in the most amazing ways. And I've seen that because I'm a pastor. You all are some of the angels in my life. I'll never forget going through the worst part of my divorce after I moved to Chicago and feeling so much fear about how I was going to survive financially and how I was going to pay the lawyer that I was forced to have. One night at a session meeting, the session gave me a card with comforting words and a check for a lot of money. And they explained that they had taken up a collection between themselves and wanted me to know I was not alone. Sometimes we are angels for others, and sometimes we just need angels. And together, all of us together, we become the tangible, bodily hope of God in this world. Amen.